Hi, welcome to the Shepherd's Rest Doc Talk. This is episode 101A.
I'm Cam. This is Julie. It's getting hard, all those numbers now. So welcome to the beginning,
Doc
101.
Talk 101.
Yeah. And next week actually is the beginning, or the end. This would be the end, and next week is the beginning of where we first started. And that'll be our third, I think it's Pincus, that'll be our third one.
So we'll be moving into year 3.
Yes, year 3. So this week we are in chapters 19, 20, and all of 21. And it's called Hook. That's what this week's called. And Hook basically is, there is this ordinance or this command, and we don't know why. We just don't really get it. We can't really explain it. Food is one of those that's really a good hook, all right? And the red heifer begins this week, and that's why it's, well, obviously called Hook, because it always takes the first word or so from the portion.
Right.
So this week, let's begin with the red heifer. Oh, and if you want to see last year's, it is 52A, I believe.
Okay.
And it's got a lot of good information. I'm going to try not to repeat. Things I want to talk about is how the placement of this red heifer is in verse or chapter 19 of Numbers, yet it's been being used since the beginning of the dedication of the tabernacle.
Right.
So basically, Nisan, if you follow this in time order, okay, Nisan 1, the first year that they set at the tabernacle, it gets used.
Okay.
Yet we're not discussing it in this chronological order until it's basically the end of the 40 years in the wilderness.
And why is that?
There's a lot of reasons out there. Mm-hmm. My idea is that it's listed as hope. Okay. This is the generation that's going to be going in, and here's the hope of knowing that all this that happened in the wilderness, all the death that you're around, all the times of, oh my gosh, why are we having to stay here? Why? Because we need this generation to die off. Mm-hmm. We are given hope of how we can still be cleansed in order to draw near.
Got it.
So, and I would almost say it's almost like a real emphasis, because if you had been given this earlier when it was just being used in, its ritual form, if we looked at it then, and then let's say it was in Leviticus, and then we didn't see it in Numbers as this generation's getting ready to go in, how easy would it be to forget?
Yeah.
I mean, things like we forget that Moses' face is covered. Things that we forget, like the rock follows them. You don't really think about that till it comes up this week, where they're like, where's the rock? So I would say the placement in my head, the placement is to remind this generation and us that, look, there's going to be a cleansing provided for you in order that you can draw near, that you can go in. Because in millennium, it's going to be the same idea. Oh, and speaking of millennium, so here's something I saw.
Okay.
So it talks about with the red heifer, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but the red heifer, there's this mention right here, and it's in 19 verse 16, and it says, anyone in an open field who touches someone slain by the sword, or who has died, or a bone of a man, or a burial site, is unclean for 7 days. All right.
Okay.
So it's just interesting that they mentioned even touching a bone. Again, it's touching death. But it suddenly brought back to memory Ezekiel 39.
Okay.
So let's go read Ezekiel 39.
Okay.
Verse 15 says, and those passing through shall pass through the land, and when anyone sees a man's bone, he shall set up a sign beside it, till the buriers have buried it in the valley of Hamon-Gog.
Hamon-Gog.
Slaughtered that one, huh? So the name of this valley actually means multiple Gog. Okay. So it's a whole bunch of Gogs, I guess. I don't know. It's just what it's called. It also means a burial site. It has to do with death, a mass grave. So one of the teachings I've heard on 39 is that these bones, you don't touch them because they're a result of a nuclear war or some sort of radiation fallout. So people don't touch the bones so that they don't get radiation poisoning. Not saying that's not it. But when you go back to Torah, I'm like, here is the idea of speaking of the red heifer so that they can enter into the tabernacle. Remember,
Right.
the red heifer, that's not the camp of Israel. If you touch someone dead, it doesn't mean you can't be in the camp of Israel.
Right.
There are different types of camps.
Can't come to the
There's-
tabernacle.
Right. There's the camp of the tabernacle. There's the Levite camp. There's the Israeli camp. Okay.
Right.
Or,
Israel.
children of Israel camp. Okay. So this is only speaking about the tabernacle camp. So my thought on 39 is, if we look at this touching a bone, and then we go back to 19, looking at them touching the bone, they're not touching the bone. Why? Because you don't want to be unclean for 7 days. Now, back in Ezekiel, after chapter 39, where this is mentioned, is 40, where it's the introduction of the
Millennial temple. Right.
Yes. So think about it. We're being called every Sabbath, right? Well, who would want to touch something dead? It means you couldn't go. It's a 7-day period, which means you would miss a Sabbath being called out.
Oh,
So
yeah.
if that's, if they're walking around, they mark it where it is so no one else accidentally steps on it or limits himself from being able to go to the tabernacle.
Very good.
So these bones are picked up by a professional. Think about it. It's kind of like the professionals, for lack of a better word, the volunteers who carried Joseph's bones for all those years.
Right.
Here would be someone who are saying, I'm willing to do this for X amount of time, I'm sure.
Uh-huh.
And who knows? They could actually, wouldn't it be interesting if it was the priest or the Levites or someone who go in rotation, again,
Okay.
because they're the ones responsible for protecting Israel.
Yeah.
So
Ooh, yeah.
it'd be
So protect all the
interesting.
people coming from everywhere so they don't. Yeah.
Right. Just a thought.
Don't come
So looking more at the red heifer itself, there are 3 places that the ashes are said to be held after they're burned. One is that they take some and they actually have a place on the Mount of Olives that container of ashes are held. The second place is that it is distributed among the 24 groups of the priest.
Uh-huh.
And so each group has their own container of ashes so that when they're working at the temple,
Right.
they had their own stash.
Right. Right. Okay.
The third place was in the wall of the courtyard of the temple.
Okay.
So they had 3 spots. I find that fascinating because that would mean that it's very possible that there is a container of ashes. Of red heifer
Yeah.
that were either found or will be found on Mount of Olives or in the temple, in the courtyard wall when they were tearing it down. I mean, who's to say?
Yeah.
But we've got to, and we talked about this last year, we've got to have the ashes of the red heifer in order to cleanse whoever's going to be working in the temple once it's built.
Yeah. So when we go to Israel next year, let's go look
Okay.
for it.
Okay. On a mission. Something else I saw was in 19:2. It's where the Lord is telling, it says, this is the law of the Torah which the Lord has commanded, saying, speak to the children of Israel that they bring you a red heifer. So it's actually the children of Israel bringing the red
Bring it.
heifer. And I thought, well, yeah, it's the oil, right?
Yeah.
The olive oil that the children bring. I love how the Lord makes sure
That everyone's
He
involved.
provides for them to provide for the
Right.
priest, okay, so that then they can provide back.
Yeah.
I mean, it just shows how much responsibility as an individual in the Lord's people have
Yes.
to make the group work.
Yes.
And the group fosters the individual. I mean, it's a give and take. You have to have them both. You can't just have one. Hey, I read something in the Chumash, which I thought was hilarious. It's a midrash. The reason why a red heifer is used, the cow,
Uh-huh.
is because it's coming to clean up the mess that its child, the golden calf, made. I was like,
That's funny.
funny, yeah. And that midrash also is saying that the reason why Eleazar is involved in this instead of Aaron
Uh-huh.
is because Aaron had a hand in
Yeah.
the golden calf.
Well, that makes sense.
So, yeah, and Eleazar did not. So,
Yeah.
and also think about it, Eleazar is going to be the next high priest, the
Right,
one going
right.
into the land. And this is not long before they're going into the land. Now, granted, this was already set up, but it's foreshadowing when,
It's foreshadowing that next generation.
yes, thank you, yeah.
Just like now, we are that next generation. You know, the one in Messiah's time didn't get it. That's why the fig tree. That's why
Right.
he cursed the fig tree. But this generation is going to get it.
Yeah, yeah. So now I'm going to jump into chapter 20, and if we look at 5, it's basically they're complaining about, oh, you brought us to this evil place, and there's no water. Now, if you remember, there was a rock. Yeah, again, this is just exactly what happened in 17 of Exodus when they were crying about the water. Remember, that generation came out; they had the same trials, and we talked about this last year. It's the same exact trials on that generation. It has to now come to this generation.
Right.
So now they're being tested with the water. Now, the difference is they've had a rock that has traveled with them the whole time. So now
if that rock's not doing anything.
So my notes were like, they forgot the rock.
Oh,
they forgot the promise of what the rock could do because he wasn't doing it, because they've always known it to give water.
Right.
So now it isn't. And instead of going, well, we know that it will, it's kind of the idea the sun rises every day.
Right.
One morning it doesn't rise, or we don't see it rise. So we're like, oh, the sun will never rise again.
Yeah.
Instead of, Lord, what's going on?
You're the one that made the sun.
Right. Instead of, we're all going to die, the earth is falling, the sky is falling. Though, actually, that's probably what would happen in our media and every other thought process and every news. It would be that the earth is exploding. Get ready, you have 5 minutes. Because we would have the same problem. Oh my gosh.
What?
What if that's why we have the things that happen before, like in the tribulation?
As in
the waters are poisoned, all those things. Because it's the same. How are you going to react before you come into my millennium?
Yeah.
My kingdom.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
So we need to prepare.
Yes.
How would we react? The best way, I always tell my kids is, the best way to prepare is to
go over the scenarios.
Yes, run the scenario through it. How would you respond? That allows you to respond appropriately, because you don't just get caught off guard. He gave us this so we could respond appropriately. Just like we know it's for examples for our learning.
And this is like the rock. This is like the rock. So if we don't use it, if we have forgotten the rock, of course we're going to cry out, it's the end. This is terrible.
Right. And even when, oh my gosh, even when Paul talks about this, he says for our learning, and he calls it for the last generation, because he thinks they are the last age.
Right.
So even that is more of a testimony to me right now, that it is so that we will respond appropriately, not just to these vague things, but very real things that happen in individual lives, but also upon the world.
Right.
Whose report will you hear?
Yes,
my gosh. Sorry, I'm having light bulb moments right now. I know. The heat. Whew, not from a light bulb, but from no wind. All
right. So basically, we need to learn to speak to the rock, not strike it.
Yes. Right. And of course, that was one of the things that, he didn't do right. Right. I mean, obviously, couldn't go into the land for that.
Right.
So, because he didn't give the example of how we should interact with the word. And that
for this last generation, because the generation before us struck the rock.
Right, and it was permitted.
Right,
because
and
they crucified him.
Yes.
They were supposed to, right? Maybe that's the thought of that crucifixion, that hitting the rock is what allowed the water to flow.
Yes.
For the 40 years. But now it's gotta function a little differently after that.
Yeah, and now it's like it reminds me of Hebrews, 6? Where, he talks about...
if you've tasted it.
Yes, and then, we can't re-crucify him. We can't strike him twice.
Right. Ooh,
we can't do like Moses, or you're not going into the land.
Yeah. And so when I think about Moses and Aaron this week, well, Moses makes the comment, well, you want us to do this. And I thought, oh my gosh, so here's where Messiah corrected that.
Okay.
Messiah never says to the disciples or to the Pharisees grumbling, he says the Father, my Father. Yeah. It's always the Father's doing it. He's never taking any credit, even though we know that he helped create things. He was a part of that. I guess really he had every right to say we.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
He didn't.
Because Moses wasn't supposed to.
Right. Oh.
It was not Moses doing it. It was the Lord doing it. Here it's not Yeshua doing it. It's the Lord. It's the Father. It's Yahweh doing it.
Right. He was the vessel.
Right. Yes. Just like Moses. That's hard sometimes to separate the two between, yes, Messiah is the Son of God, and he does have the Word within him, giving him that deity aspect. But to realize that as the fleshly part of him, he was just a vessel. that the word went in. You know, 'cause
Right.
we want to just make him God all by himself.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
But I love it because we can study it and get the word in us the
Yes.
same way. It's the same word.
Right.
You know, when we're in
just get that
Messiah
little
and
portion.
Messiah is in us.
Right.
And you know, oh, that just makes me think, you know, when we're in the church and we get saved, we're like, Jesus, come live in my heart.
Right.
Well, how do you do that? Jesus, I want you to come live in my heart. So we just have this thought that he just magically comes in and lives in our heart. But really, it's when we study and we get the
We're
word
building
in
right.
our
He
heart.
put the seed.
Yes.
And then we water it and plant it.
yes.
So it can grow. And
Yes.
then, oh my gosh.
And then we'll
as
be
it
the
grows,
body. Yes. Then we'll look like him. That's when we look like him.
Yeah.
He doesn't just,
And think about this too. You know, it's from your inside out, right?
Right.
What you put in is what you get out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So as he's growing in there, he's also writing it on our heart.
Right.
And that is, now we are literally reflecting what's inside.
Oh, so he's like our pinman in there.
Yeah.
As we're reading it and getting it inside, it's like,
And the last thing has to do with the word serpent. And it's obviously with the serpents. All right. So in verses 6, 7, 8, and 9, we see the Nachash used for the serpent, but we also see seraphim used.
Okay.
Seraph also means fiery. But the seraphim are the fiery serpents that are around the throne of God, singing at all times.
Holy, holy, holy. They're the ones that say the holy, holy, holy.
Right. And Nachash is, you know, from Genesis 3:1. He's the deceiver. He's the one, you know, very cunning. But the root of that can mean to observe signs, to learn through experience.
Okay.
And then it can also mean divination. But isn't it interesting that learning through experience is how we got in trouble by wanting to partake and being fooled by the first Hasatan, right, who came as that serpent.
Right.
Here, their bitterness, these serpents, and they're biting them. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if it's not just the serpents going around and biting them, but that the serpents look lovely or they're being deceived by them, and when going to participate with them, they are then struck. Because it's not everyone dying.
Wow.
There are those who are calling out who are being struck.
Yes.
And then he puts the one that he's going to build, that the Lord says to build, and that's when he uses the word seraph.
Yeah.
That's the godly one, the fiery one. Like his judgment will burn the poison out, you know?
Yeah.
And then when Moshe makes it, he's going to make then he goes back to the Nakash. But I don't know, there's just something about those words, the way they're used, showing how what was meant for evil is now being turned to be good. And again, the very last one that Moses raises up on is Nakash, because when we have Messiah on the cross, fully dressed in sin, he is exuding the look, exuding is not the right word, he is reflecting the look of the Nachash.
Right.
He's looking like the serpent, the sin.
He took it on.
Right. So, I don't know. I just think it's interesting the way the words play, and I think there's a lot more there to it. Well, now that we're being rained on, and it's really dark, we will definitely call this an end for today.
Okay.
We thank you so much for joining us for this fantastic study.
Yeah, it was.
And we hope that you will join us, Flip Side with Julie and the Prophets.
Shalom.